All right, good evening, everyone. Everyone hear me good? Well, Deb, I didn't get to talk to you. How are we looking out there?
Hi.
You haven't been there yet, or?
I have not been home since they paid it tonight.
Okay, perfect. Well, I was there this morning, so.
And how does the road look? He goes black.
That's a good thing. That's a good thing, just in time for the rain. So. All right, just quickly before we get started with the presentation, I kind of want to back everyone up to a few years ago when a lot of this process started to bring you up to date with where we are today. So I will be very brief. Okay, very brief. So originally, before my time, June 2017, $2.7 million was approved for the renovation of the highway garage. Very shortly after that, they identified some larger scale project that the $2.7 million was not going to cover. So basically that money has been there appropriated since 2017 and very limited funds have been expended out of that for some smaller repairs. Then came, I guess the next biggest date I'd like to talk about was the RFQ that went out in August of 2019, and that was for the redesign of the garage. There was a team of internal staff along with some outside resources that were brought in to assist with that process. The decision was made to move forward with the team of Sebago Technics, with Grant Hayes Associates, and Allied Engineering. That selection was made in September of 2019. From there, we proceeded to work with the team to redesign the site. Ran into a lot of challenges. The site has a lot of environmental impacts there. The location of the transfer station, the location of the existing building did not make it very easy to design. So we held a workshop in June of 2020 to bring those concerns and challenges forward to the board. And following that, there were a couple months where we were back and forth, kicking around some ideas, attended a couple board meetings, made some mention of a few things going on. And it was suggested we create a task force to really dig deep into the transfer station. So January 2021, the task force was created. It consisted of 2 board members, Wayne Berry and Cheryl Schulte, 2 members of the public, Nora Ordway and Don Gobiel, and 4 staff members, myself, Chris Osterreicher, Gary Whitten, and Tina Riddell. So that process was about 13 meetings, every Wednesday from 11 to 1 typically, some were a little longer than that. And basically, we went through 6 scenarios at that time, specifically for the transfer station. We also got into the highway garage. Just quickly mentioning them, keep the site as is, find another location in the community for the transfer station to reduce the scope of the facility to serve local residents, eliminate the transfer station entirely and rely on private industry, relocate the transfer station on site, and exploring a regional approach. So we went through those scenarios. We solicited feedback from the public via a survey. There were roughly 1,800 respondents. So we had a very healthy response to the survey, gathered a lot of information. At the May 25th, 2021 Select Board meeting, the findings were presented to the board. And basically what we came up with, the brief summary was the recommendation was to keep the transfer station viable on the site at 36.0 and expand the highway garage at 36.0. So we re-engaged back with our team, led by Sebago Technics, and that's pretty much where we are here today to basically present the master plan going forward and solicit some more feedback before we move forward with hopeful additional funding to pull the project up. So from there, I'll introduce over to the presenters for today, Owen Smith from Sebago Technics and Mike Hayes from Grant Hayes Associates.
Brian, my screen's not wiggling. That's probably going to drive everybody nuts. Is that a spectrum?
Brian, Blake's trying to get another cable.
Oh, that is okay. Well, if anybody passes up, I apologize. Good evening. My name is Owen Smith. I'm a civil engineer with Sebago Technics, and here tonight with me is Mike Hayes of Grant Hayes Associates. Mike has been the architect involved, spent a bunch of time down here at the site with Brian and going through the program and really assess what they need for facilities, what they have for the facilities. We also had Allied Engineering who went through all the buildings, focusing mostly on the existing public works building to see how we might integrate that into any future plans. And they looked at mechanical, electrical, ventilation systems, all of that, and then worked with us coming up with the master plan. The presentation I have for you tonight, what happens when you're shorter. The presentations I have for tonight is really just some introductions, which we've had. We'll spend a little time going over the facility study, programming, the master plan. We will talk about costs, obviously those are important, and then have some conversation on next steps in the process. So as Brian says, the town went out for an RFP process and selected our team to work with them. Thank you very much. We're glad to be part of this team. Our team has worked on a number of public works facilities throughout Maine. It's been something that many communities have been focusing on in the last several years. Public works facilities all are becoming antiquated. And many times the public works facilities have some of the most equipment, most costly equipment in their inventory. Brian can tell you that a new plow truck is somewhere around $200,000. So it's very expensive, and considering that a lot of times those sit outside and they can't be properly maintained or protected, it's quite a challenge. So, and again, this slide just sort of presents the project team. So the current site, which all of you know, consists of a 1990 pre-engineered metal building. It's about 9,340 square feet, which has served the community as the primary public works building for years. That building has just become antiquated. Public works has grown, the needs, the equipment's changed. How you function and operate inside the building has presented a number of challenges, so they just really outgrown the building. There are a couple of other buildings on site. One's a 1980s steel and wood garage, about 2,000 square feet, and another is 2005 pre-engineered metal building, it's about 3,200 square feet. And the city has, or the town has, 2 salt sheds down there. They're what they call rub buildings. They're a fabric building with concrete blocks and then a fabric covering over them. And those buildings work very well for this purpose. Many other communities have used those. The project site of the property is about 56.5 acres, but that includes the transfer station, the landfill, and the dog park. What Public Works currently operates on is about 9 acres of that total parcel. It's pretty constrained, actually. The site's served by public water. Interesting, right now the site is served by a leach field, but we do have the ability to tie in public sewer, which we will as part of this project. And of course, power and data is all available from the sewer. This aerial image here just sort of shows the area and where each of the buildings are. So we've sort of boiled it down to a few key items. Mike Hayes here in a minute is going to talk about the building program and dig into it a little bit more. But the town Public Works has just outgrown the existing building, which is what we've seen in many of the other communities. We went through a similar process in Westbrook with the new facility, Orono, South Portland. Mike actually did one up the street for Scarborough, and went through with Wyndham also here recently, and it's pretty consistent across the board that just the need for improved facilities. There's limited ventilation and mechanical systems inside. There's no crane, sewer, or a wash bay. The crane is kind of important. Most of these public works facilities have a crane for some of the larger truck bodies that have to be moved on and off when they have to maintain them. For some of the larger tires, the cranes get used an awful lot in this facility. A wash bay is a must investment in the public services facilities. All of them have wash bays so they can environmentally contain the wash, run it through an oil water separator, grit separator, and then put it back into the sewer system. There really isn't a formal wash bay on the site right now. The wash bays, when I was working on the Westbrook facility, there's been some studies done that if you can get the salt and the dirt, keep them clean, and especially in the winter months, it does prolong the life of these vehicles. There's a number of code compliance issues within the building, and Mike can speak to that here in a minute. I'll talk about code, not the site guy. There's also, the site is really in poor condition. It's just been a site over the years. It has been used and worked hard, and no real
it's fine.
pavement is broken up. And then with the transport station and public works, there's really no separation between the two right now, and we are proposing to address the separation. That leads on to the next item, which is really inefficient space and site utilization due to the lack of building and equipment storage and parking. It's been, Public Works have done a great job dealing with what they've had, but at some point it becomes really inefficient and ineffective for the operation. And again, one point of access for the public operations and transfer station. It would be good to separate those two, keep the public from having to cross with public works vehicles moving in and out of the site. It's much safer to do it that way. Mike, I will let Mike get rid of this slide. It's a little hard to read, which is why Mike's going to work to walk you through, but this is really the components of what accommodate the facility.
Avoid the wires.
Yes.
Thanks, Owen. So this is, for those of you who are familiar with program studies, it's basically where we go in and determine the functions that are going to be in the building, the uses, and associate, attribute sizes to them based on either a foot by foot or square foot size to come up with what the actual overall building size needs to be to incorporate all the uses that are going into it. So this particular program is for, the first section you see here is for what would be a new building. And the new building would have two major functions. The first function is the garage function, which is where all the plow trucks and other apparatus are stored, maintained, and all of the support functions that go along with that. Spaces for storing parts, tires, mechanics resources are in there. The also secured storage for tools and other things that are used by Public Works people on a day-to-day basis. So that major portion of the building is for the garage functions. It's going to be about 14,000 square feet, a little bit more than that. And it includes the drive-through wash bay that Owen's previously mentioned, and four other work bays. There is a crane bay. There is a crane in there that will traverse multiple bays. You'll see that on the floor plan that we'll show you later on. There's also the other spaces in there are a carpentry shop, and there's bulk storage for all the facilities in the town where that central supply would be. There's also the other things that go along with it, lockers and changing rooms and bathrooms. Below that is the administrative functions for the Public Works Department. And that's really the administrative offices for personnel that are running the department. There's also a large conference training room, break room for all of the staff to be able to go to. And that's where they take their breaks, but that's also where safety training would occur and other interactions with other departments could be hosted there also. That square footage is roughly 3,400 square feet. 32. Yep, so 3,400 square feet. So the building itself is around 17,000 square feet once you include the structure and all the pieces. The existing building would be repurposed so that building would get a minor amount of renovations, essentially gutted, and it would have a heating system in there sufficient enough to be able to store all the trucks inside, or the majority of the trucks inside. so that A, they're protected from the weather, which is key to their longevity and reducing the amount of money you spend as a town on new apparatus. That combined with the wash bay will make the lifespan of your purchases for apparatus have a longer lifespan. As Owen had previously mentioned, the biggest problem with these vehicles aging out is the salt corrosion from underneath that really wreaks havoc with the electrical systems. It's one of the major problems if you don't keep them inside and keep them clean. So this approach basically alleviates that problem. So the majority of the vehicles would be able to be parked inside the existing building that we've got and leave on site. It also helps with prepping for storm prep. We're able to basically load up a lot of the trucks with sand salt the night before, or the day before, hours before, get them inside, keep them dry and warm, and then when it's time to roll before, get the school buses out and all the other safety apparatus that needs to hit the roads, they're prepared, they're ready to roll, and it's a much more efficient process. It's much safer for the town. One of the other buildings on site would be basically a very small, I shouldn't say small, it's a cold storage building. It would have all of the other smaller things that Public Works has, all the trailers that they use, snow blowers, lawn care, all of those tractors and things that really, the seasonal items that shouldn't be strewn out around, they should also be undercover. This cold storage building, basically it's a pre-engineered metal building, a large garage, no heat, just lights, a little bit of power, but everything's inside, and again, helps it last long. And then, so that's roughly around 4,800 square feet in size. So when you take a look at all of the square footage, we're roughly around 3,500 square feet. 35,000 square feet, sorry. Somewhere in that vicinity, a little under that. And that would be all the facility space that we need. And that also takes into account some future growth too. So,
thank you, Mike. The master plan, that's the graphic that's in front of you now that really shows what we're proposing to do. We worked through a number of concepts on this master plan. I will tell you that the reuse of the Public Works building as storage is, we did that in a similar fashion in the city of Westbrook, and it worked out really well. The building, while it's not suited for the actual fleet operations and maintenance anymore, it is still in good enough condition that it can be repurposed for storage at a relatively low cost and used to keep those vehicles inside. The new fleet maintenance building would be placed in front of the old Public Works building, and there would be there's going to be 3 accesses onto the site now. Let's see if I can move this cursor here to show you. There'll be an access up here at the upper side of it, and that access is really going to be the public employee access and a secondary access for operations, but it's really intended to allow the vendors that need to come in, the public who needs to come into the site. There'll be parking in front of the building with a sidewalk and an entry vestibule that comes into the site, and that will be through this access up in the front of the building. Then there'll be a second access, which is really for the operation. That access will be for the plow trucks, for the employees who are going out and take care of the roads, and all the other things that drain and everything else that Public Works does. That would be at this location here. Then there'll be the third entrance, which will be dedicated for the swap shop and the can-do recycling building. There'll also be a designated area for folks to get sand and salt. They come to the site. I believe that's there's that option that's there now. We'll continue that. And then the can-do building will be next to it. And then there'll be some parking right next to the can-do building and some parking across the street or across the access road for the dog park so that we maintain that access. And we're looking to repave the entire site with the exception and partially into the transfer station too. But then there'll be the second dedicated access that will be for the transfer station. The transfer station will have a fence installed separating public works and the transfer station. It'll still allow for the same normal circulation that folks have been used to, with the exception you won't wander back through the public works area. You'll come back out on the same access road that you came into the site from. We are going to remove the oldest of the storage buildings that were on site. We'll keep the 2005 pre-engineered metal building. That's in good shape for miscellaneous storage of signs, equipment, hay, and seed, and everything else that the public works needs. And then the sand and salt sheds will be relocated from their current position over in between the equipment storage buildings. And then that will provide us with adequate space and circulation for dump trucks, tractor trailers, trucks with trailers that come in and out of the site so they can make those sort of turning movements that they need to do. And then there'll be a space, a drive aisle between the older public works facility and the fleet maintenance. And out back, this brown area here is where the sander rack is. Then we've dedicated, the whole site will be basically re-gravelled, repaved, restriped, organized a little bit differently so that we have more defined parking for areas for equipment and for the general public, for our folks coming to visit the public works facility. The wash bay is in the back side of the public works building here where my cursor is. And then there'll be gated access into the site. So we will have gates at all three entrances. Actually, the gate for the can-do, the recycling, and the dog park will be positioned further into the site, since obviously folks would be coming in and out of the dog park and maybe to get sand and hot use hours at the transfer station, so that gate will be shifted in. But the other two gates would be towards the front. And those gates would be operated, shut down during non-use times for safety and security of the site. This configuration of the site will result in some wetland alterations. Back last year, we mapped all the wetlands on the property. We've looked at some different scenarios on how we can minimize the impacts to the wetlands and best accommodate the building program and have the least impact on the wetlands. This configuration seems to achieve that, but we still will have about a half an acre, a little bit more of wetland impact, all associated with this driveway that comes up into the front. And this front area up here, we will likely need to impact those wetlands to reuse that area for stormwater management. We're going to obviously have to go through a permitting process through the town site plan review and the main DEP process. And that will require that we implement a formal storm drain system on site. And that storm drain system will be focused on water quality treatment. There's really no formal storm drain on site right now, so by doing this, we'll improve that stormwater runoff condition. We are also proposing, have included a budget for some PVs on the site, photovoltaics. The amount of PVs you would need to power the whole site is much more than what we have for space or for buildings, but we are proposing to integrate in the use of PVs on the site. There's a budget for that in the program, and they would likely be roof-mounted PVs on the site. The transfer station will stay as configured with some modest paving improvements around it, but otherwise we're not proposing to do anything to the retaining walls, anything to where the containers are placed, anything to any of those buildings. That will stay as is, with the exception that we're going to put a fence to separate the transfer station from the public works operation. operation. This white area in the back is where Public Works has snow storage. They have material storage such as aggregates, gravel, sand, recycled asphalt, chips, brush, that sort of thing. Those operations will continue basically in the same location that they have in the past. We are going to construct a couple of several bins, likely 20 by 30, 20 by 20, so that they can segregate gravel, stone, riprap, loam, those sort of activities that they need, so they have some defined areas for those locations. But everything else will be pretty much as it is, just some modest site improvements. Mike, the building, we'll let you talk about the building.
So this is the exterior elevation of what the proposed new building would look like. The tall section that you see with the garage space and doors obviously is where all the large apparatus would be. And then the section, the lower section, is where a lot of the support spaces for the work bays and the entire administrative office center would be in that lower part. If you're looking at the top perspective view, on the right-hand side, this is where the public entrance would be on the end facade. On the end facade, right here, this would be public entrance. And then all the rest of these entrances would be for employees coming and going, mechanical room, those kind of things. And then on the bottom elevation here, that's the opposite side of the long view of the building. Again, there's overhead doors for drive-through bays, and also the end bay being the wash bay. There's one long bay from front to back. We have, again, there's a bunch of doors in there for just access for employees to go back and forth. This door down here, this glass door down here, is down in the large break room area. So, because that room can hold a lot of people, so we've got a couple sets of doors in there for meet fire code requests. It's roughly 30 by 40. We'll look at that when we get to the floor plan. So here's the floor plan for the building, and on the left-hand side of the plan, these are the administrative offices. So you've got the public entrance from this side that faces the parking area that is designated for the public. Keeps it separated from all the public works comings and goings. So you've got the administrative offices here. You've got the large break room here, which is used for trainings, as I said before, breaks and that kind of stuff. You've got some bathrooms here. All of this is a secured area, so this set of doors here, this set of doors here, those are secured doors so that as the public enters the building, they would need to be cleared, buzzed, or buzzed in, or whatever to get further into the building if they were to do that for whatever reason. So it makes that part of the building secured for the public and the personnel. The rest of the spaces that you see here is a fairly large mechanical and electrical room, which are pretty typical for these types of facilities. There's sprinkler life safety rooms also. This is the locker room for all of the public works folks. And at the end of the locker room are a couple of changing rooms that are basically full bathrooms with showers. But people can change and do their gear in there. And then as you move further toward the work bay area, you've got some tire storage, tool storage. All the fluids right here is where they keep all the fluids that they use to maintain the vehicle's large apparatus. So it's hydraulic fluid, oil, those kind of things. Sorry, can you hear me? Sorry. Let me slide this down. Is that any better? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. And then this area down here is all for parts, and it's directly accessible to the work bays. So as the mechanics are working on vehicles, it's very close and very efficient for them to retrieve parts that are used. There's also a mezzanine level that would be for additional part storage. Lots of times the compressor's located up there. Some of the tires that aren't typically used on a day-to-day basis, the long storage tires or the off-season tires are kept up there. It's really going to be, to Brian and his staff as to what they put in certain places, but we've got plenty of room for them to store all their stuff. These two bays down here with the arrow that goes left to right, these are the bays that have a crane that will move back and forth as needed. So this is where the heavy stuff will be done. The welding, fabrication, anything that's needed to fix parts, plows, new sharp edges, those kind of things will be done pretty much down here. These other bays are also, they're basically for mechanical work too. This bay over here, what we call the short bay, if you want to call it that, that's where the smaller vehicles would be taken care of, plow, pickup trucks and those kinds of things. And then at the very end is the wash bay. So the wash bay runs the full depth, and very essential for these types of facilities. On the right-hand side, this is the size of the mezzanine, which is about 24 by 45, so it's a pretty good size mezzanine, and it sits on top of this area of the building. The next slide, sir. Thanks, Bruce. So these are the secondary buildings, as you call them. This bottom building is the existing building. The existing public works building as you see it. We would gut it out, put some a little bit of heat in there, and this is where they would store the large vehicles, and as I said before, do some freestone staging in here. The other building on the top here, this is that smaller cold storage building I mentioned before, where all the other items, smaller type items, the digital trailers, the back trailer, the harbor master Zodiac possibly, the hot box, the Zamboni, the chipper, the sweeper, the roller, the pavement roller, sidewalk tractors and mowers, all of those will be stored in this building. That's roughly 30 by 160 or so. That's it. All right, and those are the buildings.
Thank you, Mike. A couple of just quick follow-ons on that. The type of building construction we're looking to use would have a masonry lower area, like a push wall, a concrete push wall. And the building, the pre-engineered metal buildings have been using these insulated building panels, and they're very, very efficient. They come with portal frames, they put the frames up, they put the Z-girts across it, and then these mount to it. And the nice part about them is they've got the metal finish on the outside, and they've got the metal finish on the inside. As opposed, if you go through the current public works facility, or you go through some of the typical pre-engineered metal buildings, you'll see that white back insulation on it that always falls off, or you have to put something up there on it. These buildings have a finish on the inside and on the outside. And if you ever get a chance to see, we use this approach for Westbrook, South Portland, Saco, Wyndham, all of those facilities have those exact same finishes in it. And I believe Brian has been through most of the facilities with me. Barnum's the only exception. That was a masonry block building, and that just had to do with some preferences by the community. But all these other ones use that panelized building system, and it's efficient. It's got great R values, and it works really well. In the buildings, we're also going to use radiant floor heat in the building, and the radiant floor heat is very effective in heating the area where the human space is in. It heats the mass, And then on top of that, they have the benefit of when they park the equipment in it, it tends to dry the floor, it tends to dry the equipment out inside the building. It's a must in the building. We've had great success with the radiant floor heat in the building. Very efficient. The mechanical systems, ventilation systems, all that in the buildings will be like a climate vent or similar system in it, which is inside the building for the vehicle exhaust. There'll be a whole building ventilation system in it. We've got to meet all the current codes, probably use high efficiency boiler systems, likely gas boiler systems inside of it. We did not budget in this budget for geothermal, and it's always a possibility if the community decided they wanted to fund geothermal energy. We did it up in Orno, and for that building, which is 5 years ago, that added about $300,000 to the building. I'm doing another building for the Kennebunk Water District that they've made the commitment to do geothermal. And that's adding somewhere, similar sized building, somewhere between $500,000 and $600,000 the cost of it. It's pretty efficient, but it does add a substantive cost. So I just mentioned that we did talk about it, we did look at it. We felt that at the prices we're getting to right now on the project, that maybe that's something that we should wait on and go with high efficiency condensing gas boiler systems and electrical systems, and then include the PVs as part of the project. So costs, I guess I get to talk about costs for the project. Sorry about that. So the first thing I want to touch on costs is everybody's aware of what's been happening with costs and cost escalation over the last few years, and I get it. We've been monitoring it very closely. I can tell you when I first public works building we started with, we were down around $147 a square foot for just the building, and that was up in Orno, and then it progressed. We got to Westbrook, we got closer to the 160s, and we got into the 170s with South Portland, and Mike's been experiencing in the 200s now on the last one he did. So we've been watching these trends because steel prices have taken major increases. Insulation has taken, rigid insulation has taken increased pipe. All the materials have taken a big jump. Wood, I won't even talk about wood, but we're staying away from wood, but even metal has increased significantly. So we have taken that into consideration as we've looked at the trends and costs and tried to say, okay, we know that if this project gets approved by the voters, it's likely going to be another year before we get everything permitted and under construction and a contract and moving forward. I know Brian likes sooner than that, but so we've tried to project out there that time frame so that we hopefully cover ourselves. I wish I had a great crystal ball. I don't know. Maybe the costs will come down. I don't know, but I don't think so. But we've tried to follow those trends and project as best we can for the future costs of the project. It's always awful to start a project and not meet the budget. I can tell you, we the predicted budget for Orno, we hit that. Westbrook, we actually were under budget a little bit. South Portland, we hit that budget fine. And Mike, I don't know where you ended up on. And you were under in South. So we've tried to be realistic with the budgets so that we're not saying, oh geez, we've got to start cutting this and this and this out. We're trying to be careful around that. The cost estimate that you see here that's in the presentation, we took the master plan and we applied costs from earthwork to paving, to storm drain systems, to water, to extending the sewer, to the site electrical, lighting, conduit, signage, landscaping, new building construction. You can see on there that we budgeted $275 for the new maintenance building on it. We budgeted $100 a square foot for the vehicle storage. Those numbers are reflective with an increase from what we've seen in the past. And then the equipment storage. And then the last item is, I want to talk about is FF&E. That's furniture, fixtures, and equipment. That is every building project, every new building project, you have IT, you have phones, you have computers, you have audio visual, you've got furniture that has to go into it. If you've been into the current public works facility, my recommendation would be not to repurpose that. But you do need to include an allotment of money for all of that, which we have included in the project. Now, we've also built in a pretty healthy contingency of 15% in the project, which is about almost $1.5 million in contingency in the project. We hope we won't use it, but we've had pretty good luck of not having to dive into contingencies, but we would be derelict in not including a contingency in the project, because at this level, this is a master plan level to look at what we think the budget will be, and then as we move into 30% and 60 and 90% design, we'll refine that, and we'll probably squeeze that contingency down a little bit, but it's really important to make sure we have that in there at the moment. We have carried a budget for solar in it of about $170,000. There is another option that I guess we've talked with Mike and Chris and Brian about. Is sometimes the communities can enter into a PPA agreement, power purchase agreement, where as a community, you don't get the tax credit if you buy the solar directly. If you're a private individual, a private party, you can get that tax break that comes from the government. But what that means is you actually enter into an agreement with somebody like Revision Energy or somebody else, it doesn't matter who, but they have private investors in it, and you basically have an agreement that you will buy back the energy from them. So you have zero initial cost. And then after 5 years or so, then you make a payment for basically the balance of it, and then you own the system, or maybe you continue on with the lease. But that is something we'll talk about, but I would recommend keeping that number in there. Some folks prefer, we're going to buy it outright and own it. We did include a budget for the can-do building. Because this site is going to have about 24,000 square feet of wetland impact in the state of Maine, anytime you impact over 15,000 square feet, you fall into what they call the in-lieu fee program. And in York County, that's about $5.10 or something like that a square foot for impact. So because of that impact, we'll have a fee that the town would have to write to the DEP once the permits are issued of $124,000 plus or minus. Obviously, we will try to reduce that as much as possible as we go through the process, but I can tell you we started with a much higher value of wetland impact, and we've been whittling it down as we've gone to try to keep it down as minimal as possible. We will have to get a Site Location and Development Act permit and an NRPA permit. We'll be impacting redeveloping over 3 acres of land area, so that kicks us into the site location permit. And that application fee, right now, it's gone up in the last year, of course, but it's between that and the NRPA, we're thinking around $12,000 is what the initial application fee would be. Then there's another item in there called general conditions, which is basically the contractor, when we put this out to bid, they'll be required to have a payment performance bond for the contractors. That's state law. And there's a cost to that. And then the contractor will have to likely have a job site, may have a job site trailer, and then they'll have supervisions and general conditions and temporary power and everything else that they need as they go through the building. So, and sometimes if we build in winter, there might be winter heat that they have to keep the slabs and the concrete as they place it. So we generally carry, and I can't read this exactly, but I think it was about 6% of the construction cost for it. And then there's design, permitting, and construction administration, and we've been tracking what those costs are, and that's him, and me, and my inspector, and the mechanical and electrical guys, and structural engineers, and all those other people I have to bring on to the team. The geotechnical engineer, we have to do geotech on a site like this, so all of those costs have to get factored into it. And what we add up and come up with on the total cost is about $13.1 million, I believe, is about $13.1 million for the total cost. So that's what we're looking at for this total project. And I think you have about 2.7 million or so that is currently allocated. So this does not include that 2.7. So I suppose what you deduct the 2.7 from that. But that's what we're looking at for a number. This is pretty consistent with what we're seeing with other costs. It's interesting, to be honest with you, this project is not too different from what we did in Westbrook as far as repurposing a building and rebuilding a site. And in the 5 years from when we did Westbrook to today, those costs have escalated from, it was about $9 million for Westbrook when we did that one. But unfortunately, we're just seeing jumps and jumps and jumps in materials and building costs. And I tell everybody that the longer you wait to do this, the costs do tend to creep up, even if there's a slowdown in the economy. So there's a kind of a time value of money on it. So that ends our presentation. Unless Chris or Brian have anything else, or Mike has something to add, we're here to listen to you folks and take your questions. I don't know if I can answer everything, but we'll do the very best we can. Thank you.
Everyone can start with questions to the team here about the presentation first, and I guess we can get into more of the conversation on next steps, which includes staff a little more. So we'll open it up for anything for these guys right now.
Sure.
I'm just curious as to how much the transfer station is adding to the cost of this project.
Very little. Some paving work is about it. I am building a secondary access road and its own designated road into it, but there is some cost. I didn't break it out. I looked at it sort of holistically, but it's not a huge cost. So my instructions were to do the minimum we had to do to get access into the transfer station.
Because originally we were talking about wetlands and stuff.
Yes, I mean, we had different scenarios,
yeah, go ahead.
So originally when we came to you guys a little over a year ago, the thought was to stay away from the wetlands entirely if possible. The only real way to do that was to eliminate the transfer station. We needed that area. So then we brought forward worst case scenario, which was taking our entire new building, new entrances, dumping that entirely into the wetlands, 3.19 acres from the wetlands. Worst case scenario, we had that big number of input fees, and since then we've worked it, reworked it a few different ways to get to this, which is the minimum impact we could find to still meet the needs of the town. I guess the Transportation Task Force, that survey really showed us strongly that the public wanted the transfer station and they wanted it basically right where it was. That was pretty overwhelming from the respondents. So this was our best effort to meet our needs, the public needs, and be as conscious as we can of the environment.
Oh, yeah. Actually, she was before you, Mike.
She certainly was.
Should I use the mic? Yeah. All right.
Bring it down. I know the feeling.
I have 3 observations about site utilization, but before I say that, I would just like to say, in terms of the brick and mortar, since this is new build and repurposing, my expectation would be that this would really be blue ribbon, energy efficient buildings. And in terms of wetlands impact, again, whatever mitigation can possibly happen so that there is little to none impact on the wetlands, I would certainly encourage that as well. So pertaining to the site utilization, it was my understanding that by prior agreement with Public Works, and this was through the Energy Efficiency Committee, there was discussion that this facility would also offer a universal composting site for the community. It would be managed by Compost It, because they already come to our community and they pick up small buckets of compost, but there had been discussion, I believe, with Brian and the Energy Efficiency Committee about a site for a universal collection point for compost for community members. So I'd like to see if that can be worked into the master plan. Additionally, I didn't see anything on here about fueling. And because the future of municipal fleets is in all probability either hydrogen or electrical vehicle, I would like to see something that reflects the future of how our fleet will change and how we will fuel the fleet of the future. And finally, I am looking for space on this master plan in terms of the site for remote or satellite parking, whichever word makes it clear in your own minds. But I am a resident of the Lower Village, and I am a member of the Lower Village Committee. And a pressing need that continually comes up is the congestion, the traffic congestion in the Lower Village. And the answer always seems to be, oh, well, we'll build a parking lot, we'll build additional parking spaces. But current parking management studies done both in Maine and across the country and abroad illustrates the fact that in the congested area, to just create more parking spaces or pave more and make more parking lots does not, in fact, relieve congestion. And one of the things that does relieve congestion is remote parking or satellite parking. So I would very much like to see a space carved out for satellite parking on this master plan. The details, the thinking about how we do that, use it as a remote site, not only for the Lower Village, but for the rest of the community, is a future discussion. But since we're getting in here on the bottom, the starting point, the opportunity to change the master plan as we speak, I would very much like to see consideration given to a satellite parking facility.
Thank you. I can address a couple of them, just to provide some feedback. Thank you for your questions, very good. Your question about the electric, one thing we have been including in the newer public works facilities, we did it in South Portland and we will likely include one here, is electric charging, because many people are going to electric fleet vehicles, and when we work with the electricians on the buildings, I know that, you know, it's probably ways off. I guess there are some electric public service vehicles that they're exploring. I know Chris Branch from for trash, and I talked to the public works director in Portland, and they went out and looked at one, but they're very expensive, and he thinks that over a little bit more time they're going to evolve and could become more advantageous. So we do look at that into the building electrical systems because it is something that is coming. So thank you for that question.
So by look at, does that mean you build that into the master plan? I don't understand.
Oh, yeah. So like a PV charging station, we will likely just include one. When we put it out to bid, then one will go in on the site. It will just be installed as part of the project. And as far as future electric for vehicles, what we would do is size the service in the building, size the electrical service, and provide the infrastructure so that that technology develops. Public services would have that option to go to that technology. Thank you. The other question on the fueling, I believe, Brian, my understanding is that they fuel off-site. That's why we didn't do any fueling on this site. So there's no bulk, there's no fueling proposed on this site because to do fuel off-site. Brian probably can speak to that more.
Yeah, no, that is correct. Basically, we have a contract with fuel off-site right now. And it's pretty favorable. That was discussed internally with our finance director being very involved in that conversation. And the decision was made not to put the bulk fuels on here. So we're going to continue fueling off-site very, very close to our facility.
Yeah, I was not looking for a fossil fuel facility on site. I was looking for hydrogen or electrical vehicle charging, because that's the way municipal fleets are going to go. And in fact, the state of Maine, officials in Maine at this point, does have RFPs out for municipal fleets to go in that direction.
I will definitely investigate. I'm not aware of those. I know some of the trash collection trucks are, but as far as cloud trucks and any of that we're rolling trucks, I've not seen or heard anything like that.
I guess I'm not necessarily speaking to heavy vehicles, but Public Works has other vehicles other than
Understood.
I can't speak to the policy of parking outside. That's more of a Mike and Chris and Brian. But as far as having a satellite parking, I am incredibly confined on this site in that I have wetlands to the north that we're trying to avoid, so it's pushing me to the south. I've got a dog park and a landfill to the south that I can't push any further south, and then I've got a transfer station to the east behind me, and of course C Road on the west. So we have confined, we've worked with, we know what the program needs were for the site, and it's taken quite a bit of time to just fit all of that onto the site. So to create satellite parking or an additional parking, the only direction I would be able to go with this to create that would be more into those wetlands to the north, because the town does own a fair amount of property to the north in the site. But that's all wetland up there. We went through that whole process and mapped it, because I would have loved to have moved the facility further up there and taken advantage of that land, but again, we ran into wetlands in that area. So I got a transfer station, a wetland, a landfill, and C Road, and it really knocks me down to a pretty confined space, but that certainly would be a discussion.
Yeah, I think, you know, to keep it really brief, you gotta look at your cost to buy a space, you look at your need. You know, if you're talking $10,000 just to build a space that's sort of a rule of thumb in terms of land acquisition, you're basically paying for that in the wetlands. So I think it makes sense to broadly look at the need of longevity, and you're essentially looking almost buying land, because you don't have it. Those wetlands are usable lands. So it's probably more prudent for the town to look at that. If you have a remote space, you're probably in that position when you may be acquiring property somewhere else. Mixing into this thing, you're right, if the town has very limited need to expand, well, you have to think internally, and externally. You already have 3 curb cuts on the site, which generally you're limited to just 2. We add another parking lot, and you probably even try to separate it further. So that's one challenge with the site. You already have a lot of uses here. So I think the point about having remote satellite parking and that type of thing is certainly something to look at in the bigger picture, not to make sure this site can support that. Just because of everything we're up against. You already have a location right now. That's the problem. So.
And I know you had one more question, and now I don't remember what it was. So.
Was that previous?
Oh, the composting, that's him.
So those conversations have been had with CPRC. We're under contract with them for our transfer station. They also own We Compost it on our curbside. So those conversations are ongoing. We do have them at the community gardens. The composting bins, they're not open to the public at this time, but there is ongoing dialogue to make that a little bit better and more useful to the community. So those conversations are happening as we speak. That wouldn't even need to be part of this.
So they don't need to be part of it because it would be a section of the transfer station?
That's correct. That would be my idea, would be put it to them because they're the same entity. Rather than us handle, we don't have a DEP permit for composting or anything like that up the back of the site, nor do we really have the space, quite frankly, for it. So I will try to push it onto them and have them try to push it onto them. Basically, to provide one of their dumpsters up there. That's been my idea, and that's where the conversations have been. They have not confirmed wanting to do that at this point. So that's where that stands.
So they don't want to do it at this point?
They just said they're calling and do the curb, they prefer to do the curbside.
See, I'm thinking just fairness in price, because I paid for we composted to pick up at my driveway. When my community garden plot that I got, I paid $50 a year. Part of that is for the compost bin that's there. So if you're going to build something on that everybody's going to be able to use, there has to be an equitable way for anybody that's using that to pay for it.
And my understanding from meetings with composted, and now we are looking at pre-COVID, so, was that it would actually be more cost effective if they were picking up in one spot, a universal collection spot, as opposed to needing to send their smaller trucks down the streets and that stuff.
If that's the case, I'm not going to compost, because I will not want to compost.
I didn't say that it's so limited. I'm just pointing out that we composted didn't feel that a universal composting site, the cost would be less since they could use a big truck, and their big trucks have lifting capacities, and they're more energy efficient, and they're more cost efficient than sending the small trucks with possibly 2 individuals who have to, get off, collect, that sort of thing.
And I get that. It would be like picking up trash in one location would be way more cost efficient. But how do you split that price accurately? We also had compost at the center at one point, and it didn't work out because they were getting so much garbage in it. It was glass and it was things that really couldn't be composted. So it was costing us more than we were getting from it. How many years ago was that?
I'm not 100% sure. I don't have the years or dates on it.
At least 10?
I got lost in my own thought there.
When we had compost down at on Sea Road.
I don't know.
I'm going to say it was at least 10 years ago.
I know it would be before this contract which went into effect in 2015.
And we had it, it was just, when there was almost abuse, it was leaves and you couldn't turn over the compost fast enough for it to turn into compost and ended up being garbage, and we had to pay to have it hauled away.
Okay, well, this would be hauled away by the compost bin, so it wouldn't be on site, and we would be responsible for managing the compost. But my point today is just in the master draft plan, there was a prior agreement that need would be addressed. So that's just what I'm bringing up. And not what I hear you saying is that you have been having ongoing conversations with the transfer station about providing that that service. So as long as we are addressing the concern and possibly following through with that, I'm certainly satisfied. This wasn't really intended as a discussion as to whether it was something we were actually going to do. It's just a matter of if we have a master plan, and this is the groundwork of the master plan, if there needed to be a spot for this previous agreement, then I would like to see it on the master plan.
So I'll take your question, but I think Mike was after.
Just one real quick. I know this was designed for current and future growth. How far into the future are you projecting as far as meeting our needs for public services?
I can. So Mike's question was a question I get a lot, is how long into the future will this facility serve the needs of the community? And it's a great question. We get asked that question a lot. What we mostly find is that the buildings themselves last, basically, they're taken care of for a very, very long time, almost perpetuity, with some limitation. What happens is equipment, technology, codes, ordinances, how we function as a society, policies, that's generally what makes these facilities need to have changes and modifications to it. So if provided that we don't have any radical changes or anything like that, we would generally predict a life of upwards of 30 years with a building like this. And again, the building lasts much longer than that. It's just everything else tends to grow beyond it. To your point about vehicles and equipment, we don't always know what, I don't know what the future holds. It's going to hold something different. We all know that. But right now it's evolving. So it's generally those sort of things that drive the need for changes in the buildings. I will tell you that inside the building, Mike has been very careful about this, is that the locker rooms with the independent changing areas we've been doing those in more facilities because of gender identification considerations. You know, it's men's and women's locker room, no more gang locker rooms, things like that. They're private changing rooms. So you go to we did it in South Portland, pretty successful, that you go in and you get your gear, and if you need to take a shower, you go in, you close the door behind you, and you have your own area. When you're done, you go out and somebody else can come in. So we've dealt with that. The training room, we looked at the staffing levels and where they project to go, and we created a large training and function area. They're just jammed right now, but we tried to accommodate that sort of use in it, and the number of offices for the foreseeable future on the staff and the equipment that they would need. We think we've got that covered. And Mike, do you want to add to that?
So as Owen had indicated, the lockers are sized larger than are needed for the present, but we're looking at 10 to 15% increase to be able to grow the department people-wise. Up to 10 to 15%. We've got additional offices that are in the administrative area that are future. There's 2 that are in the future in there. So we built into the plan some personnel growth, and we know that, I'll stretch Owens' 30-year to, this is a 30 to 50-year building, truly. This would be considered on the cusp of being what they call a Category 4 essential facility. So this building is being designed and built both seismically, hurricane-wise, energy-wise, to be able to withstand substantial weather or environmental event. So this would act as a hub, so to speak, as well as your public safety building for taking care of the community.
Just one small consideration. We did a study. The study was done of the town's municipal buildings for energy efficiency, and one thing that was noted was the need to have lighting that when you leave the room, the lights go off, and when you come back in the room, the lights go back on. So that's just a small consideration, but it does save.
That is part of the energy system, the electrical energy system for the building. And specifically, we do that a lot now, where it's an active on-off as far as motion sensor or occupancy sensors. The other thing is, Owen's mentioned briefly the construction of the building, especially the new building. These panels are highly energy efficient. They go together really quickly. They save time and expense for the actual construction of the building. The way they're put together, the way they're designed now, is far and above what they used to be like. These things interlock, they're weather sealed, they have rubber in them. It's just amazing. It's a very quick system. You have the way the existing building is oriented and the way the new building is oriented. The long facades, they're peaked roofs, so the long facades face south. So you have a prime opportunity here to take those long south facades, and if you choose to go with photovoltaics, it's a great exposure to flood those planes and those roofs with photovoltaics. Create a campus, so to speak, that helps you, with your overall energy efficiency and meet those climate goals that everybody's trying to reach.
Since we got on this whole thing of energy, all these buildings that are being constructed now, and we're doing them in all public works buildings, they have control systems in them that are integrated into basically Brian will be able to monitor the systems wherever, we get alarms, they can just set points so that they can optimize the systems. And these controls are all done over the internet now. It's basically a screen on the computer, it's a touch screen that they can adjust systems and make sure they're running at optimum. And we've been using those building BAS systems, building automation systems. And they're part of it. LED lighting, the building automation, high energy, efficient heating systems, hot water heating, and then in the ductwork and the ventilation systems, we use VAV, variable air volume systems, so that what happens is as demand increases or decreases, the system ramps up, ramps down, instead of this constant air volume system. When it's on, it's on. So these systems are much more efficient in how they operated. I thought about bringing Tony Hayes from Allied, but I didn't realize we were going to get into this, but he's a wonderful person on all of this, and at some point when we get into the detailed design, you'll hear from him. Thank you. Yes, sir. Sorry. You're next.
John Carson, the Vice Chair of the Budget Board, and I've got a handful of things. First is just some housekeeping. Bob is behind that mask. The mask is wrong, and we probably should have opened our meeting here. Deb, do you mind if I just open it just for housekeeping, so opening the Budget Board meeting because there's a quorum of Budget Board members here. Thank you. And I know that probably no one wants to get into protracted kind of back and forth about various issues, but since some ideas have been tossed into the stream, I'd just like to throw a couple of comments in about some of those ideas that have been brought up. The first is that we are, I believe, more than halfway through the contract term with our current transfer station vendor, CPRC. I would be very concerned about building more installed base around a particular vendor's needs, for a building that, is going to be completed 2 years out, potentially, near the end of the contract terms, and I think that there's, some reasons to be taking a close look at that contract, so I think we should address the bigger level issue, the higher level issue of, having, say, community compost, or whatever those higher level community needs are, not just within terms defined by a particular vendor who happens to be fulfilling that function. I think we need to dig a little deeper on that. On the issue of satellite parking, I heard your answer, and I just want to throw out the idea of perhaps looking at Sea Road School, which is underutilized. Great. Just wanted to make sure I tossed it in there. On the issue, or speaking of RSU 21 properties, where are we at with discussions of a cooperative use of the wash bay and potentially helping to defray some of those wash bay costs with the RSU? Not
at this time, no.
Okay.
But I'll be open to those conversations.
Okay, because they need one.
Yep.
But
I know internally here we discussed our.
Okay, but if we're going to try to cooperate in that way with them, I think sooner rather than later to bring them into the discussion because they may have particular needs around it, and we might want to factor those into some of our planning. Moving on, looking at both the square foot cost and the aggregate cost for the can-do and treasure chest aspect of the project. It's a decent chunk of change, and though we heard some of the specs for other parts of the building, we didn't hear a lot about, how we get to a $135 square foot for something that's operating out of sheds right now. And while I'm a huge supporter of the treasure chest, as I think it strikes me that can-do, is something that might be able to be supported in a more virtual way through our conventional recycling or returnables channels and not require actually building infrastructure. to do that. So I would like to know a little more about what you envisioned for those aspects of the project, and also kind of tangentially discussed for modifications to the dog park and the transfer station facility itself, but it seems that those are important pieces. I know for the dog owners, they're going to have lots and lots and lots and lots of questions about that. So I think we should probably get in front of that, and I'd like to hear more about what it is that we're planning to do around this transfer station facility, which is currently operated by CPRC. Now I'll sit down. Thanks.
Thank you.
How you doing?
Good.
Courtney Netto with the Select Board. Thank you very much for your presentation. I did actually repeat two of John's comments. One was the wash bay. The buses, I think, would be huge, and then obviously fire, ambulance, police, whoever. It seems like that's a no-brainer. The dog park is definitely going to come up, and rather than delay anything, thinking about getting ahead of like eliminating some of that parking where it's it looks like it's public pickup for maybe the dirt and whatever that would be, the public sand, that spot. There's I go there all the time, and the overflow is ridiculous, and just something to consider that you're gonna, why deal with it later than maybe now? If maybe there's a way to expand the spots to the left a little bit, maybe get a few more in there somewhere or something. And then the other two things I had written down was, what about, is there any way that if this was rejected or this is overwhelmingly rejected, did you guys in the ad hoc committee break this down into what phases could look like if, the town was to only approve part of this being done at first? Was that a discussion at all? And then the second question, you can answer them whenever, is for you guys, what are 1 to 2 things that other towns maybe had in their plan or budget that you cut from our plans solely based on maybe being conservative with what you think our budget would be or what the town might approve?
Great questions, thank you. Some of them are policy questions, so I can't answer those, but I'll try to tackle a couple of the questions. The dog park, the modified dog park is we do have to change the fencing, and I do reduce the size a little bit on the dog park. That's the reality of trying to fit all this into the site. So we would rebuild the parking spaces, we could provide those parking spaces. I could add more parking into the site adjacent to the dog park, but the configuration of the dog park where the parking is kind of gets narrowed down towards the other end. So I was worried that if I continued parking down, I would start to compromise what usable space there was down there. So that was really the premise behind the parking. But we can certainly continue that conversation as we go along and refine the plans. Square footage costs and costs of the can-do building. So this is a program cost right now on what we expected. They'll have a foundation slab on grade. They'll have power into the building. We might put water into the building. I doubt it, but and then it'll have. We're not planning heat, right? No heat.
Basically, it's a couple of outlets, lights, and a couple of people doors, and another. It's really stick right now.
To serve the same needs that they're utilizing now, above and beyond what they have, but it's definitely a nicer building what they have, but it's going to be the same needs they have today.
Challenge is the fact that it's wood frame, those prices have gone up incredibly. If we say, no, it's not going to be wood frame, it'll be steel stud or metal, light gauge metal frame, we're still fighting the same thing with today's numbers. Some of those are starting to plateau, and some are actually coming down on some products, but as a whole scale look at the entire building, we haven't seen a significant impact yet, but it's trending down. Some of it's plateau. And again, it's a 2-year out number. We're taking values that we think would be today, budgeting it, we're being built out 2 years.
Thank you. The other question was around phasing. So phasing always brings up an interesting question. The challenge that we will be doing some phasing anyway, because we've got to build a new public works facility first, and we have to move Brian and his crew over to the new public works facility, so then we can basically got to have the old public works facility pulled and turn it into cold storage. So that is kind of that is the portion of the phasing. And then there's some other logistical phasing that we actually have to work around, because public works is going to be on the site operating while construction's going on. So when we get into preparing the bidding documents and how the contractor will build it, Brian and I and Chris and Mike will be having a number of conversations on how we want to sequence the construction so that we can keep them operational. There will be inconveniences, we all know that, but we need to keep them functional and operational during the construction. If you were to try and say, let's just build the new public works building and not do the equipment storage or the other buildings, the danger in that is that the site, I designed the site as an integrated site. So that the buildings, the site, everything works together. And anytime I've done phasing, as hard as we try, and we said, well, years later we'll build something else on it, it never fits together exactly the way it would if you do it at one time. And it does end up costing more in the long term if you say, okay, we'll build this now, and then we'll come back in 5 years and maybe build this. And I always see an increase in cost, so it's never worked very well. I would encourage you not to do that, but it obviously can be done. I just think it creates a lot of inefficiency into the overall construction, and there are risks and dangers that things get missed along the way. The other piece of the other question was the two items you asked. That was a great question, by the way. 2 items that we left out of this to save money and compared to the others. And, you know, we programmed this with the wash bay, the interior finishes, how we would reuse the existing buildings, the paving, the equipment storage, all very, very identical to the other ones we did. Of course, your site's configured a little bit differently, but we're using the same building materials, we're using the same finishes on the inside of the radiant floor heap. Where this project, actually, we programmed in PVs on it, which we didn't do in either Westbrook or South Portland. We had hot water right, on that, but we would have, by hindsight, it was 2020, I probably would have done PVs in South Portland, although they had it on the landfill. In Orono, we programmed in PVs on the roof, but we forego. We didn't do that. The structure's built to put it on because we went to geothermal heat. So that is, yes, if there was one thing we might have left out on this, and I won't say we left it out, it was trying to be respectful of budget, is we did not include geothermal heat on this. Chris, there's gas. You're going to have to now try to think, there's no gas down there. So we'd either use, have to use propane or fossil fuel heat. Geothermal, I can tell you that, when we did it up in Orono, the payback was about 7 to 10 years on the geothermal energy, and it's actually been working well. I do not like open wells on the geothermal. I prefer closed loop wells, and the reason for that, they're a little less efficient, but there's been all sorts of stories. You can even read about them on your own, but there's been issues with pulling the water out, running through the system, your heat is coming out hot, you're compressing it, you're making it hotter, it cools, and there's scaling, and there's minerals in that water. I just don't even want to go there. So everything we've been working on has been closed loop systems. I think Bowdoin had an open loop system into college, and they had issues with it. There was a story of a library down in Massachusetts that they put in an open source well, and the pumps there and scaled up and failed like 5 or 6 years. So glycol loops are much better than closed loop systems. So that is the one thing we did not include in it, just because as we were bumping up against the $13 million, to add another $500,000 seemed challenging on it. Mike, what else? Is there anything else that we automate? So the yes, oh, go ahead.
No, it's not. The automated wash bay.
So we did talk about the automated wash bay, but so you don't want an automated wash bay, and I'll tell you the story behind that. South Portland has an automated wash bay because, but we did not do one in Westbrook. We did do it in Orono. But this wash bay that we put into it will have wash bay wands, like a self-service wash bay, that are up high and around. The walls, we usually run FRP panels all the way up so they're clean. There's actually a room that goes in that has the heater for the wash bay unit, the pressure vessels, the pumps, all of that sort of thing in it. And then we usually have put wands at 4 total at each end of it so that you can be washing more than one vehicle at a time inside the facility. And we do an undercarriage wash system. So what we did in Westbrook was there was a grate in the front that had a bottom blast in it, and what you did was there was a remote control that the truck driver or whoever the equipment would get, and they'd hit it, the water would shoot up and you would drive over it slowly and it would wash the undercarriage, and then it goes into the collection system and a little grit separator. In South Portland we got an FTA grant, Federal Transportation grant, because they have a bus service in South Portland, so they got $500,000 in an FTA grant, so we did an automated system. The automated systems and we built the system around so it basically accommodated all sorts of vehicles. Buses, trucks, dump trucks, all sorts of different sizes of vehicles. And it works, but it's more maintenance. There's more maintenance costs to an automated wash bay system. And that does add costs to the facility. I think you toured that facility too. And after we looked at it and for your needs and the town's needs, we felt that not going with an automated system, other than we'll have an underwash collection system. So those are great questions. Anything else?
No. I will just,
yes.
At the risk of using the term state-of-the-art, which nobody likes to hear anymore, this is a very modern facility to the point that, as I said before, 30 to 50 years out, of course things are going to change technology-wise and things like that. But this is a very modern facility. So we really we took all our cumulative experience from these other 6 to 8 projects that we've done. Each one we do, it just gets better and tighter, and more efficient, more cost-effective, better design, better options. So that's what this building represents. The only thing you don't have on here is a fuel site, which that's a policy kind of thing. Other than that, this represents just about everything that every other community has been asking for, and this is what we're doing here.
Yes, sir.
Dan Sarah, I'm on the budget board, but these are going to be environmental questions. The first one, and you just mentioned it with the wash bays. How is the runoff from that handled?
So the wash bay will have an internal, the slab on the inside is pitched internally. It gets collected in an internal drain system inside. Then from there, it flows into an oil water separator or a grit chamber. And then from there, it goes to the sewer system. Great question, thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks. And then back to these energy questions that people have been asking. I don't know if LEED certification is something that applies to this type of building. Is that something that you're familiar with?
Oh, I am.
Okay.
Both Mike and I are LEED certified.
Oh, excellent.
And Tony.
I'm just thinking in terms of the 30 to 50 year service life of this building and the climate challenge that we're facing currently. How far will this design go to minimize the carbon footprint of this building and of the fleet that it services?
And what more might we be able to do? And, you know, you mentioned the geothermal and the payback on that. You mentioned the photovoltaic, but I'm not sure I heard a payback on that. Those are the areas where it might raise short-term costs, but really pay back in long-term value to taxpayers in town. Can you speak a little bit more to?
Yeah, I'll give my thoughts on it, then I'm going to let Mike, because you'll hear, while Mike and I work together all the time, you know, might hear a little difference of ideas around it, but I think that's good. So my thoughts around the LEED certification, LEED certification is more than energy. It's about sustainability. It's about putting in systems and recycling and how you operate and use the facilities and showers for X number of full-time equivalent employees. It's bike racks. It's walkable. It's being within a certain distance of a bus and public transportation. So there's a whole component to LEED that goes beyond just the energy efficiency. It focuses on sustainability. As far as the energy efficiency goes, I think what we've seen over the last, since LEED came into effect in mid-2000s, I think, around 2000, yeah, I got certified in 2009, and I think it was about 2006 or 7 it really became popular. But at that time, the energy code, LEED put the bar up here, and the energy code bar was down here. But since that time, that bar has been getting very, very close to the LEED certification standard. So, and if you do choose to go LEED, if you wanted to certify the building, there's a cost to it. Mike here we'd have to know up front that that's what we want to do, because there's a bunch of paperwork that have to be done to go through that LEED certification process, and there is a cost. And what we find is a lot of people want to integrate in the higher energy standards, but they don't necessarily go for the LEED certification. It's more of a, in some ways, there's nothing, it's great, nothing wrong with it, but some folks want that energy without that accolade and that cost of adding it. And that's just what we've seen in some of the other, none of the other facilities are LEED certified, but I've had this conversation with all the other facilities. I'll give you my thoughts around, as part of the LEED, one of it is, you know, reducing the carbon footprint is where you get your energy from. And there's a big push around the electrification of the energy use and putting in electric systems in the building, and then either doing power generation on site, or some of the communities, I don't know, has Kennebunk done a community solar project? Do you have one? Have you done one, Mike? So, like South Portland put in a 1 megawatt solar on their landfill. And basically what they did is entered into a PPA, a power purchase agreement, where they're buying that power and they're offsetting their carbon footprint through that with other city facilities in it. So that is an option that more and more people are looking at, is to go with the solar. You probably will see flyers coming around where you can actually start purchasing green energy from solar. You probably have already got it from NextGen and other facilities show up in the mail, and you can negotiate agreements, and you're basically agreeing and you're buying their power. The interesting thing is that power doesn't go from their solar array directly to your facility. That goes into the grid, but you're buying that green energy. The other option is, I talked about geothermal on it. The geothermal is basically ground source heat pump. And so you have green energy to run the electric heat pump to the ground source heat pump. And then you use the ground source heat to heat and cool your facility. And, what we found up in, Orno was the first public works facility in the state that did it. And they went back and forth on it, and then they decided that they wanted to include it in and fund it. I think they've been pretty happy on it. They had fossil fuels that they were going to have to use to heat their facility, propane, heating oil, whatever. You still have to have some propane involved, because you've got to have a backup system, because there are sometimes gaps in what that ground heat source pump can provide. So you do want to have those backup systems in it. But I think that they have seen, I've talked to them about what their fuel usage was with the heat pumps, and it's pretty negligible. Their electric bills are a little higher, but we had done some baseline energy modeling, and it came out pretty close to what we had predicted. There was a little bit of increase in the electrical, but it worked out pretty well. And we talked about it a little bit, but I guess that's a community decision if we want to program those costs into the facility. So, Mike, would you like to add to that?
Sure. From the standpoint of I'll focus on building materials and that aspect of it. There's some trying times right now as far as supply chain. And so when we write the specifications for the products that's going into the building, we're always trying to identify manufacturers who are Maine, New England, or Eastern Seaboard first. So when you list, let's say we're talking about Florida. We're going to look for flooring manufacturers that are within the radius, and we'll list those as being the basis of design. And then there's maybe 6 other manufacturers who are hopefully Eastern Seaboard or in our geographic region that can provide suitable equal products. We're always trying to pick 1 or 2 manufacturers that are close to home. And we have to weigh that against the cost and the energy efficiency of the actual production, delivery, and installation of the product. So we kind of look at all those aspects from a sustainability standpoint. So we go a little bit further, I shouldn't put it that way. We try to stay a little more closer to home from the leads aspect. We don't necessarily, we try to exceed some of those leads points. The other ones are, as Owen's mentioned, site utilization, bike racks and those kind of things, which you don't necessarily need for this facility, but it's not appropriate to look at those things, or I shouldn't put it that way. It's not as high a priority as it is to try to make the building efficient and resourced. So that's kind of how we approach it.
Thank you. Questions from somebody who hasn't asked one yet? Wayne?
Thank you. Wayne Barrett. Can one of you address, and probably Brian can weigh in on this, is what's the comparison of the square footage of storage that we're using now in different places around town? What's planned here? Right now we have a lot of storage on the mezzanine in the existing public service building. But I didn't see a whole lot of storage. There's one mezzanine, and that's going to be for the mechanical work, right? Another question is, it looks like you've designed this pre-engineered steel building. It looks like you've designed the administrative portion for a single level, for a single story. Is there an opportunity to design it so that there can be a second story after that later if you needed to? I know most engineered steel buildings are not designed that way, but that's one of the questions. And then you pretty much rambled around all of the energy issues. The only question I have on geothermal was, have you done soils analysis? I assume you have in your company. What's out there for what you're talking about for geothermal? I have one.
Well, I'll tackle the soils analysis for the geothermal. So usually what happens with the geothermal, to really know what the energy is that you can get out of the ground, and this is what we did up in Orno, and we're doing it right now up in Kennebunk Water District, is we're actually installing a well, and we're testing it, and we brought in SW Cole to do it, and look at the properties of the heat and the energy in the ground. And then they take those properties of that and then convert that into what is available for energy, and then decide on how many wells they need on the site. In general, it's about one well that's 400 feet, 400 or 500 feet in depth for about 1,000 square feet of building square footage. That's a general rule, but it can vary from site to site, and it really has to be based on the analysis. So if you make a commitment that you want to go to geothermal, or you want to do geothermal, basically we can estimate about what we need for well phase on it, and then you have to go out and install a test well, and that test well becomes part of the well field later in construction. So it's not a waste of money, but you do have to do that up front to verify that you're getting the energy out of the ground. Like we did that in our own and integrated it into the well field, and we did the same thing in the Kennebunk Water District and integrated that into the well field. And that was about a $25,000 cost to put that well in and do the analysis. So, storage, I'm going to leave that up to Mike to talk about, and Brian. I can't talk about off-site storage, but Mike spent a lot of time with these folks talking about storage.
Yeah, of course. So I do believe there's quite a bit more storage here, and the biggest reason for that is that kind of building across the way, the catch-all building, as we like to call it, that houses 2 loaders and a backhoe. They will be moving over into the current building we're in now and freeing up significant storage in there. And there is a carpentry shop sign area all in the new building proposed for all of that storage. And this mezzanine is quite a bit bigger than what we currently are working with. So I believe our storage will be increasing significantly on site for sure.
So where is the new mezzanine?
In the new building.
So that's a one-bay mezzanine.
There you go. Mike, do you want the floor plan, or do you want?
No, that's fine. So, I'm sorry.
You can talk about that. I know it's very what we're working with now.
So it's roughly 1,000 square feet. It's, to be exact, mezzanine is 1,080 square feet. So it's 24 by 45. This is the diagram of a mezzanine, and that mezzanine sits right over this area. So that stair is this stair. So from mechanics bays, they go up, they get whatever parts that are stored up there that they may need up there that aren't already stored down in the first floor parts room, which is rather substantial, a lot bigger than he has now.
It wasn't clear about storage. We're talking about public record storage that we're storing now, not when we get into storage. I understand what the time for that.
Oh, okay, sorry, my apologies. The record storage, you're keeping those on site?
That's going to be staying where they are currently. That's where the 2 loaders and backhoe are. Once they move up, we'll have more
We're
there.
talking about cutting the building, right? And then renovating. But you're going to keep the mezzanine, and you're going to keep the storage.
That is correct, and most of that stuff is in the building across the way that we're not actually touching that, so that's going to stay where it is. It's just going to have a lot more room because equipment will be moving out of there into our current building right now.
And was there another question that I missed? Besides the storage? Oh, thank you, yes. So at this point, so as I think you already mentioned, pre-engineered buildings are designed to be just for what you're designed for. They're never really designed to be expanded vertically, just because that runs the number up pretty large. We didn't see a need to have a 2-story section in this building for the administrative area, just because we had enough space built into the ground floor plan for future expansion and future needs. So we didn't look at that. We can certainly look at that and say, okay, if you're going to go up another story, we can certainly look at that and see what that cost impact is.
So design massing becomes an issue because right now we're pretty good at if you double that, blow that up.
It becomes a big rectangular box. The issue with second floor is not that you can't do it. We have to put 2 stairwells in for egress, so that gobbles up square footage on the first floor. So a few things we move up. Being a Title IX public facility, we have to have an elevator. So there's another $100,000 there. So we can certainly look at that as being a line item. if you went 2 stories on that area, but I'm not sure it's something that you, well, my personal opinion is I don't see you needing that in the 30 to 50 year lifespan. This is full. We can absolutely.
So while you're right there, as the architect, my question is, if you were to go with geothermal heating, is that 500 square feet to get the mechanical water room? Is that going to be enough?
I think we're going to need our mechanical engineer to determine if that's enough size or.
The short answer is, we would likely increase that mechanical room. Because I have heat pumps in there, I'm gonna have a container for the glycol loop in it, and then there's additional plumbing that goes through it. So I would likely take up more room in there, that's the reality of it. And we would have to have that conversation, whether we grow the building a little bit, or we take up some space from somewhere else. But if that is an interest to the community, we could start butting up against the $14 million project, and I am trying to be conscious of cost as best we can on it, and still build in an energy efficient building. But we would need direction on that.
So I have one question. You made a remark, something about we were looking at the total budget, and it's $13 million, and it was 2.6 for the site. You said something about that wasn't included.
Oh no, the site's included, everything's in
So
there.
we've already appropriated $2.8 million. Is that part of the 13?
So we would need 10.5 more.
Yeah. So the 13.8 minus the 2.7, $10.5 million is what the referendum would be.
So that's a better number for the public to understand.
Yes. Thank you. I like better numbers.
Thanks.
Okay.
We have a quick question because we're running out of recording capability.
Okay, quick question. Can you
come on
just
up
speak
there
to
so we can get you on broadcast?
where?
Can you just speak to outdoor lighting, both standalone and
Sure.
building, particularly about the power source and about whether it would be dark sky sensitive?
Yes. Lighting would be, there'll be lighting on the buildings, and there'll be standalone lighting. And all the lighting that we use, and the towns requires it, and we follow it as a standard practice. All LED lighting, dark sky lighting, has the hoods over it, so it directs it down. And what we find is it's not the lighting that you used to see with the big floodlight out over it. These are lightings that go on the building, and they wash down on the buildings with hoods over them. And they're very, very effective at preventing dark sky, creating dark sky conditions, not flooding upwards.
But they'll be electric?
Oh, yeah, they're electric, yep.
Have you considered photovoltaic? Solar, lighting?
Well, that would be part of, so we would put the PVs on the roof line of the building. Those PVs would be tied into the electrical system. So we would power, but if the lights are on at night, those PVs won't be generating electricity unless we put in some sort of battery bank system. And that's...
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but yes, I understand.
John?
Okay.
Thanks, sorry, I did have one other question. I noticed a new fleet maintenance layout, and one of the rooms is designated Parks and Rec, and I'm not certain what the programming for that room would be at that facility.
That's going to be a Brian.
So I believe that might have been a typo in the original document, but it's Parks and Facilities, which are down there currently. So Parks and Facilities are both down there.
So that's a meeting room for that?
It's an office.
An office.
Yep, it's an office and a storage. There's a storage room as well for all their materials.
Thank you.
Real quick. This is really quick. Is this going to be housing some people currently housed in Town Hall? If so, how many?
Currently it is not. It would be the staff that is currently down there.
So, any other questions? We have a few more minutes if anyone has a burning desire. Wayne?
Right? You're calling this a master plan, but is it preliminary, or how far along are you locked into this plan?
might be a question for you and me, Brian, but we've worked pretty diligently over the last year to come up with a plan and a budget that works with what the needs of public works and based on all the work that Brian and Chris and the meetings. So we've tried to maximize the use of the site, minimize the environmental impacts, and works towards an energy efficient building that meets all these needs that the town will require. So at this point, the next steps would be if we agree on the concept, on the plan, then we would move likely into a design mode for the project because you do have money to start the design and permitting, which could be a little bit at risk if it doesn't go through with the vote, or you wait until you have the public referendum and hopefully get approved. And Brian has the
It's not, but.
So this is our timeline that we would like to try to implement to move this project along. You have to remember is I'm always nervous about the longer we wait, the more risk I have in increasing project costs. So I'm trying to be attentive to that too. So, you know, back in June of 2017, there was $2.6 million appropriated. Most of that, none of that was really touched. We went in 2019, so it's been almost 2 years that we've been working through this. We started working with Brian and the town. And then we're here tonight with a public hearing. The task force had some findings, and Brian, those were released for the project. And then September of 2021, which is where we're at the workshop, then there would be supplemental funding approval by the voters of the $10.5 million. And the way we put it here is then we move into design and permitting and construction. But Brian, when would or maybe Mike knows, when would it go in front of the voters for what would be the referendum?
We're looking at possibly late February as our earliest opportunity.
Yeah, so basically what we have here is timeline. We're up to the red block here. So the next step is that supplemental funding. Obviously, a component of that is educating the public, all that stuff. So I guess whether that's at this meeting or possibly an agenda item in a very near future board meeting, we need to get some support to try to move this forward and have the first reading, public hearings, all that stuff. So I guess that guidance would have to come from the board before we really much more from where we are now. But we have a design. There are some minor changes we likely need to make after the feedback from tonight. I don't think that affects the bottom line drastically unless we get into the geothermal conversations and stuff like that. But you know, the supplemental funding, that's kind of the next step. I know it looks like there could be a special meeting at the end of February. We're working back from that. I know we have a little timeline on a few different meetings in December. The first meeting in December would have to be the first reading. I believe working backwards from that. So I guess that's where we're at now is what do we want the next steps to be? I know what my vision is, but I would need the support of both boards in order to enact those. So.
If it wasn't passed in February, then we would need about better part of the year to do all the design and permitting. So the goal would be to put it out to bid probably in early 2023. Construction 2023 into 2024. I know it seems like a long ways out, but that's the reality of how
it's Thank you to our friends from Sebago Technics and of course our staff for staying late tonight. I think it's a fascinating subject. Just as a point of personal privilege, I didn't ask any question, but I will make the following statement. This is by far the most important project that we have on our plate right now. There are legal issues with the existing facility, efficiency issues, and it doesn't scale up for future use or needs of our community. And the other thing I wanted to mention is the geothermal. I just did a quick analysis of it, and principal and interest payback would be $36,000 a year, which is less than 2 cents on the mill rate, and that's without factoring in any of the cost savings. So As you think about this project, it's better not to be penny wise and pound foolish. If we're going to make this a first-class facility that has energy efficiency in mind, I think we wouldn't want to shortchange ourselves here. Okay, and with that, we don't have any official end to a workshop. Deb, do you want to anoint the end of the budget board workshop? John?
Aye.
Okay, we don't vote, so yeah, aye. So thank you for showing up, and thank you to Brian. Thank you very much.
Nice job. Thank you.